feeding on my tension. My countrymen, they love their fiction. Words upon now, it's made with good intentions.
Welcome to 1 to 200, the Media and Politics podcast. We're sneaking in a final episode for the year. Our last one was a downer. So we thought, why not record an episode when myself, Kyle, is not working on 2 hours sleep or less. And he can be a little bit more effusive and intentional about not being really bleak. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Ginny. How are you doing, Ginny?
Bleak.
No, look! It's the holidays.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, everything's great.
That's
I'm
what I
great.
like to hear. Toxic positivity, please.
Yeah, heaps of it. I'm smiling so hard that my lips hurt now.
Great. I'm also joined by Simone. How you doing, Simone?
Kyle, you know I got a mouthful of bagel right now. I'm doing great. It's got cream cheese, egg, ham, other Christmas goodies that have been left over, you know.
Wonderful. Look, that's the positivity that we're hoping to bring to the episode today. Lots of stuff happened this year. Lots of it has been pretty bad, but there are some good signs on the horizon. Are there? No, look, I'd be lying to say that. But some of it's funny. Just in the last week, the far right and incoming administration of the Donald Trump presidency has been eating each other's faces, which is a lot of fun because what the fuck is their little ministry or cabinet position called? I'm not going to use the fucking acronym because it's such bullshit. But essentially, the anti-regulations
Department of
team,
Governmental Efficiency.
that's the one, has said this week that actually they needed high-quality migrant workers, and the entirety of the far-right, onlinosphere blew up at them because they're all Nazis, and they hate to hear that non-American migrants might have anything to offer over what they say are white Americans. And so Elon Musk had all his entire fan base, or large chunks of it, posting pictures of him being hanged, among other forms of being executed. A whole bunch of the big, far-right media stars have been calling him a traitor and a foreign plant. I don't think it will necessarily have any real impact on what the Trump presidency is going to do, which is just fuck everything up. But I hope they're having a bad time.
It's great. I kind of love it. No, I kind of love it. I saw a really good, well, not good, sorry. Not really good. I saw a not shit article, which is rare. I saw a not shit article on the Verge, The Verge. And the fucking subheading for the article was, I never thought leopards would eat my blue check. And it's actually been sending me. I think it's interesting to see how, and I think it should expose to people who have half a brain cell, that people in positions of power like Musk and most people who are working in this Department of Efficiency / whatever the Death Eaters department is, I guess, in this new government, these people obviously just don't have a coherent political rhetoric to fall back on. They literally will just post or do whatever they want, as long as it, I guess, brings them publicity and brings them notoriety. The fact that Elon Musk, who has been so anti-immigrant as of late, be posting stuff that basically talks about how much he thinks the H-1B visas is actually wild, because obviously we've seen him support and champion and platform these far-right anti-immigration voices for the entirety of Trump's campaign, because Trump was campaigning on no immigration, low immigration, bring back things to America, fuck your cousins, not the last bit, maybe, I don't know. Maybe fuck your cousins, Sweet Home Alabama, all that kind of stuff. And now that Trump has said that he wanted to crack down again on those H-1B visas, Elon and his quote-unquote inner circle are like, you know what, no, actually, we love having skilled migrants from India. That's the best thing ever. And while the response, obviously, from the further right cohort, like Laura Loomer, who is, well, just the strangest woman alive. While the response has been obviously disgusting, it's been really interesting and maybe somewhat concerning to note that despite the clear lack of coherent rhetoric on the right is still I guess, experiencing like that sense of like community and bond. It's like they have this huge infighting issue at the moment where they're calling each other the most racist things possible, whether over each other's support or like they're over Indian Americans. But it doesn't seem to me like that is actually removing people from the right or making them less right. It's more like, yes, the things that they're more like they're doubling down on the further right aspects of being right. Like the pro-immigration people are now like the bad seed that have to be weeded out, for example, from this movement. Hence all the, Elon death threats and all the showing Elon doing this or that and being injured. So I mean, however this will pan out, it's funny. I think it's great that they're attacking each other, but like it feels to me like it's just a B plot in like the wider dark comedy of the US government going into next year. So I don't
Yeah.
know.
It's like accelerated Overton window stuff, right? Um,
Yeah.
and you get to watch it happen like tweet to tweet, in
Yeah.
real time. Yeah, I don't know what's gonna happen either, right? Like we've always said, the right wing understands it's a class war and has class solidarity, at that kind of decision making resource level. So they don't give a shit. Like these people can eat each other alive as long as
Mm.
they get their hands on the gears of power and are able to crush workers. It doesn't matter to them.
It has always been this way. As much as the so extreme, the topologically non-Euclidean right, if they can be called that direction, sort of don't
If they could be
understand
called this.
the the Klein bottle right. If they folding in on themselves and kind of self-cannibalizing. The Skidoo Sea-Doo dealership owners, you know what I mean? Like those people are not the same as the capital owners that are the real tech giants, like and they sort of believe in that mythology that one, they'll ride the escalator up, or two, even as increasingly deindustrialization in the United States and immiseration makes it clear, at the sort of towards the end of the neoliberal period, that they never will. They kind of just turn towards, well, at least the out group that I hate and have been made to hate can suffer, right? Immigrants can suffer. The people who are slightly below me in the hierarchy can suffer. And when we get to predictions about this country, I'll start talking about that a little more. But, in respect of the United States, thinking about those people, they don't realize that it is a kind of myth or mythology to I won't say to distract, because this has real effects on real people, like deportations at the border, which, by the way, didn't stop under Biden. ICE was never
I think they got worse.
established. Yeah, the kids in cages, which people suddenly stopped talking about, and AOC stopped doing photo shoots at, or whatever, like that sort of thing, right? That has real effects. So I don't want to downplay it and say it's a distraction in that case, but in the minds and for the purposes of the necessary illusions of fomenting this kind of hate, it is kind of stirred up, in the minds of these car dealership owners. And I think they don't understand. And suddenly these now radicalized white nationalists, these neo-Nazis, kind of passive fascist Americans, on a spectrum of passive toward the more active 6th of January kind of ones, that don't understand that they're being used, if that makes sense. And they do get something out of it, which isn't to say they're totally being used, because they also get to exploit others. But they always think, that this has always been going on. The overstayers, the migrants, like all of that sort of thing. Like, who do you think picks the fruit in California? Who's picking the produce in California? It's always migrants who are seasonal workers who are coming up. And some of them have family, and some of them will try and stay, but otherwise, I mean, they have these such exploitative conditions, and this is true everywhere. In New Zealand, this has been true as well, and we've talked about that before. One of 200, I think, has had people on before who are experts talking about that as well, and other people have as well. And there has been some reporting on it, but these people don't understand that that's always been the case. Like, the purpose of this kind of migrant class is not people who are coming and like taking your jobs. They're just another exploitable labor force, right? To people like Elon Musk, and even for those tech people, like you're saying, that, what is it called, the H-1B visa, one that's oftentimes used by those kind of tech giants and that. And I think we're seeing this split, and you're right, we can't predict where this is going to go. We cannot sit down and say, oh, well, now there's going to be some irrevocable kind of crevice, an impasse in the project of the American right, because I think that they have the memory of goldfish, which is how they continue to hold their beliefs. And so this might be papered over in a few days and everybody forgets about it. But it is kind of funny to watch Musk step in shit, you know? Like, it's really funny to watch this happen.
It's funny seeing
That's
the
all I have
death
to
threats
say
come
about
from his
it.
own team, right?
Oh my God. Yeah. Uh,
Instead of on left-wing podcasts. I think you're right. I think we don't know what's going to happen with it. I think we can be aware of is that there are internal inconsistencies in the way that these alliances are formed on the far right and on the right?
Mm,
Because they're just a bunch of really nasty people.
mhm.
And it doesn't take much to push them over the edge.
very nasty.
Yeah, really nasty.
Really,
Uh,
yes, correct.
and as long as the money's coming in and like telling them to do something, they will keep doing it. But some of them are just going to crack at some point, and I really want to see that happen. I
There is a
really,
kind of coalition implosion, this typhlosion, if you will. I
Oh
mean,
my
oh my
God.
God, now we can talk about Pokemon, guys.
No.
It came up organically.
it
Oh
didn't.
my God.
I think one of the other things,
Sorry.
moving on.
Context for people very quickly. Before the podcast started, we were talking about Pokemon. Kyle forbade us from talking about it, which I think is an injustice and a restriction of free speech.
We hate free
That's all you need
speech.
to know. You just
We
need
hate
to
free
know that
speech.
1 of 200 is restricted speech.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
all.
Look, I'm not going to cut that, and now you're going to look like an idiot. I think that, we've got this one element, right, of stuff that's happening with the incoming presidency. Meanwhile, like a whole bunch of Democrats are either going back to their pet projects, which they bang the drum on while Republicans are in power, and somehow just weren't during Biden's tenure, which is fucking embarrassing. And also other Democrats who are helping get everything in position for an increasing authoritarian Trump presidency. They're just like it'll be some random Democrat will be like the deciding vote in a bunch of stuff. And as they kind of line up the next big threats to US primacy. One thing that you mentioned just before, Simone, is the deindustrialization of the US. And there's been a little bit of discourse about this recently about how China are intentionally deindustrializing the West, and it's this big scare now. Like Western countries don't have the industrial capacity required anymore. Required for what, you might ask? Well, who can tell? Uh, but it's another thread in the narrative of anti-China discourse to prepare us, to prepare the populace, and especially workers who are like, oh, that's why I don't have a job, etc., to be okay with increased kind of Cold War archetypes, I guess, around China and maybe BRICS. But it's also just incredibly funny to me that the US and kind of the EU and other Western countries had a specific goal of turning China, other global South, and global South countries into like their industrial base, right? To create them as extractive markets, via which the West could live this utopian dream because everything was outsourced. They didn't have to have factories of their own, et cetera, et cetera. And China's just turned that around, and gone, well, now you can't do anything. But it's certainly something to keep an eye on in the new year, I think, with what just seems to be an unsustainable acceleration of Western discourse against China. Like stuff's getting a little bit ridiculous out there.
I mean, I defer to our resident expert.
You can't call me the resident expert just because I'm Chinese.
You're Singaporean. Yeah, in many ways, Singapore is like the pallet town of Lee Kuan Yew.
It's not like the pallet town. Okay, you are actually so uneducated on Pokemon lore that we can't actually do any jokes.
I love that.
Like
You are the joke, Simone.
I don't want people to get the wrong idea about pallet town.
Why is this somehow a humiliation session as well? What the fuck is going on? This is a podcast
End of
about
year.
politics.
End of year podcast. End of year podcast. We can do whatever we want.
Yeah, it is. But also I think I moved here probably like almost a decade ago or something like that. Like it's been quite a while. And I remember when I moved here, the first couple of years, I guess the formative years that I spent were like Jonky National Party years, right? Where it was like China is like New Zealand's essential trading partner, like China's the bomb, like let's get China to invest in Fonterra, things like that. And throughout, I guess, the tenure of his political career, Jonky has always been extremely pro-China to the point whereby that's like a defining thing that people outside of the country know him for. Like if you go outside of New Zealand, and then you'll be like, oh, blah, blah, blah. Like when I was a student at the time, I go, oh, yeah, blah, blah, New Zealand. They'd be like, oh, yeah, that guy, Donkey, loves China. And I kind of think it's really interesting because I don't know if we covered this or not when he spoke about it a couple of weeks ago, but Donkey basically in early December, there was this event that the Chinese Chamber of Commerce put on, essentially, which is to celebrate and to discuss Sino-New Zealand relationships going forward in the future. They've had these events every year for a while. I think they took a break for COVID, these like vision events, and they came back afterwards. But essentially, he actually spoke specifically to the fact that the USA and China's relationship is going down the shitter. And he made a point actually to point out that if not for China, that this country's economy wouldn't be as strong as it is, and that the world's GFC would have gone on for longer. And I'm going to read you this one little quote, which I thought was hilarious because I'm just trying to picture like John Key. I know that someone could do a better impression than me. I won't do the impression. But he got up in front of a bunch of people at the Chamber of Commerce and went, if you were lying in bed at night and you say to yourself, what's going to make the waka go faster? Here's a clue. Hundreds of millions of consumers who are getting wealthier who want to buy the things we produce, and that is called China. Like, what?
Look, at the end of the day, I think most New Zealanders would want a lucky cat, actually, for the in front of their insulation consumers, consumer confidence. Yeah.
But it's just actually so interesting to me. How obviously the current rhetoric around China is grossly xenophobic in New Zealand, but you still have all these, I suppose, notable political figures from the past, who are pointing out
Ghost of Christmas Past.
specifically the deterioration of the US-China relationship, right? Like it's an observation to make anyway. But I think it's often rare that you have two countries and their, I guess, trade agreements get singled out like this, right? On like a government platform. And then they go, just because America wants to have a fucked up relationship with China doesn't mean that New Zealand should follow that way. Obviously, paraphrasing because I don't think John Key said fucked up relationship with China.
He implied it.
I can say that
I
if
mean,
you want.
He could have, but I think it's interesting to hear him point something out, to point this out specifically, and also to say that New Zealand shouldn't let the US set its foreign policy. And it's like, why can't we have these cogent arguments from the current opposition party, right?
Or even from the left, apparently, in some regards.
Yeah. It's just I don't see this same, and I know obviously he's like a paid circuit speaker, right? Like we are fully aware that he's a paid circuit speaker. Like James Shaw is en route to his new career as a paid circuit speaker. Like we get it. I know that John Key has no real undying love for the Dragon of the East, but that's not the point. It's that of all the people to be making this incredibly cogent and normal and common sense observation, why is it John Key at a event put on by the Chamber of Commerce that was almost not covered apart from by, I think, RNZ did one article on this event potentially, and then maybe the Chinese Herald. But it's like, why are we not hearing opinions like this when the majority of our newspaper every day is dregs and dregs and dregs of stuff like some guy gave money to a local mayor in 2016. Like, no one cares about that anymore, Anne-Marie Brady. Like, seriously, it's just so bizarre. I never thought that I would have to hand it to John Key, but I did for like an
Honorary
hour
Philip
3 weeks
for this
ago,
episode.
you know?
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that really needs to be kept in mind, just out here in the wilds. You know, we often draw flack for being too pro-China or pro-Putin, for taking like really centrist views about geopolitics. It's actually fucked. Oh, why? You know, the classic, why aren't you talking about this instead? Why aren't you talking about that? The reason is because New Zealand media is already fucking flooded with this dumb shit. Like people already hearing all this stuff. You're hearing so much stuff that is like just not true. There's no purpose to us as like a media organization to be covering the same stuff that is just being flooded to Western audiences by the powers that be. I don't give a shit. Like, what's important is that we say, okay, why is this happening? What is the actual reality here? Yeah, I mean, I'm never going to convince our haters, right? But at least understand that we don't actually, as like a once a week podcast, we don't need to cover exactly the same things from exactly the same viewpoint as 1,000 other people doing to fuel US primacy discourse, which is what a lot of this essentially is. And I don't care if you don't think you're doing that, you are doing that. If you are taking any like if you're attacking people for trying to show nuance here, you're just serving fucking what is going to be like far right fascistic US empire, and fuck you.
Kyle,
You're failing.
a free press is when the state's enemies are your enemies.
Oh, that's right. No, you got it.
Like John Key, invited to speak at the Earth Kingdom, you know, speaks in fluent Basing say, like, I think it's again, there is a sort of self-interest in, and yeah, we shouldn't expect, well, maybe we should expect it, but we should be shocked that the Labour Party that, you know, which was trying to publish a list of Chinese names a few years ago.
Like this is the context
Oh
we're
yeah,
working
that's
within, right?
right.
This
Yeah.
is the context we're working in. Is this deeply racist and xenophobic culture that pivots off US hegemony? And if you're out here like fucking trying to prop up some of the like absolute dross that is being peddled to us as proof of Chinese spying, because you want to show that you're on the side of the little guy, you're just being taken for a ride, honestly. Like get some fucking critical faculties.
Mom and pop military industrial complex.
Like,
The military industrial momplex. Nobody's talking about that.
they will be
Kiwi
now.
mums
They
and
will be now after
dads.
hearing it coined.
Kiwi mums and dads are trying to, you know, sail their humble frigate into the South China Sea.
Like it's not far off, and genuinely, we are not far off having like pledge me's and GoFundMe's where you're buying maintenance slots for such a venture. Like,
The one thing that we don't have is specific soldier worship, and we are going to see that. I do predict that we're going to do the same thing that they do in America, where they, they have this sort of cancel industry right on the right. But I think we're going to start doing this kind of valorization of the military increasingly in New Zealand in order to manufacture that kind of support for these ventures, because at the moment it's too diffuse and there isn't a narrative, and somewhere they're cooking up a hero and villain kind of story, and to do that you need individual people. So I think that my prediction for next year is we're going to increasingly see that, right? We're seeing the villains, like these individual people in these sort of Anne-Marie Brady paranoia pieces. You're seeing, and we do see, this individual person gave money to this individual person, that's kind of, tying red strings between them. And so you have villains. We're going to see the hero version of that because it's necessary in that media landscape.
yeah, I think it's hard to do here in some respects
It is because we don't have that culture, but
Yeah.
they need to create one, and it can be done. And I think it will be done.
Have you got any thoughts about how they will try and implement that? Because I'm struggling. Like I've been thinking similar.
I mean, we already have the Victoria Cross guy or whatever, like that kind of thing, right? Where they pick an individual person and then they will valorize them and they will become a kind of figure. They'll get the Women's Weekly treatment, where they get a front page. I could give it all up for love, all my soldiering, but I'm sacrificing too much in the South China Sea.
Yeah.
Why won't they support our boys doing AUKUS? Like, I think it's necessary, in order to do that.
Yeah.
And we're already, this is quite quiet, but we're already increasing a military capability regardless in not only our surveillance integration, but they set aside, I think it was the key government, $20 billion in defense spending that hadn't been there before, for increasing our capabilities, right? And for some of that is, replacement of things, including the fucking ship that they sank, which is hilarious.
I think one of the issues
yeah.
with it is going to be that there are too many rich and powerful people here, like I'm thinking like the kind of people who run Rocket Lab or etc.,
Yes.
who want that limelight themselves, but they're not fit to be that kind of totem. And so there's going to be like this battle where like these narcissists are wanting to be in the limelight, but we're trying to get like just an ordinary Joe.
Nick Mowbray wearing like the
Fuck
spandex
off.
tight super lone
Genuinely,
costume where they got in
Absolutely
trouble
fuck off. I
from DC
can't.
Comics.
I didn't even want to think of that. Like, that's actually so horrific. Like Nick Mowbray being the face of, those like terrible ads for the Navy now where it's just like two people who serve and then like an unrelated word across
Yeah,
the front
yeah.
of them, like sausage or like chicken nuggets. Or I
Yeah,
think one time it was like third wheel and like a picture of three dudes. And I was like, what are we talking about here
Yeah.
exactly?
Are you talking about the army ones where it's like
Yeah.
anime?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
Because they
yeah.
share an interest,
Yeah, it's just so strange, right? And I mean, I guess those, I think I've really only started to notice them maybe in the past two
What was the
years or
agency
past
that did
year.
that campaign?
Huh?
Do you know who the agency was that did that campaign?
No, but while we keep talking, I'll figure that out. It's just
Fantastic.
one of those things that like I just haven't seen in a while, and I feel like I rarely see. Of course, when I was living in the States, you saw like army recruiters all the time, and they obviously advertise for the army all the time. But I'd never really seen ads like that in New Zealand until the past year or 2 years.
Yeah.
And I think you're right about the AUKUS framing, Simone. Like, in terms of it being, it's sort of being touted as like New Zealand's next step, right? Like it's like we're gonna join the other boys at the big boy table labeled AUKUS.
It's like this little table that they've pushed into the main dining table, and we're on a little like plastic chair they brought in off the deck.
Yeah, yeah, and I think even the language that Labour was using around it, right? Who now no longer support Pillar Two of AUKUS, and they called it an offensive war fighting alliance against China. Even the language that criticizes it still has that army first framing,
Yeah.
and I think that we are headed in that direction. You are correct that it's not going to be Nick Mowbray, but it's definitely going to be situation. I think we're in a country whereby the societal narrative loves an underdog. We love a disenfranchised white male in this country, and this probably is what we're going to end up seeing at some point. Some ended Harold Puff pieces
But there's
about
just no one
someone.
out there. Like, who is this going to be, right? Like, I think one of the other things which is like in the wider discourse around Western media, in terms of this kind of thing, is this real propensity recently to take extremists who happen to be useful for US interests at the moment. I'm thinking like Al-Jilani in Syria, and
Mm,
suddenly this guy comes out of nowhere. On US media circuit talking about how reformed he is and how he's our guy now. And so that's kind of that's the model at the moment is to find some of the worst people imaginable because I was going to say but because the US military complex wants them on their side and also wants to peddle them to liberals and
mm,
then give them a brand makeover. But
mm.
I just don't know what form that takes in New Zealand because no one gives a shit. Like, and we don't
Yeah.
have, like, is it going to be Brian Tamaki? Like, I'm just trying to think of the most, like, extreme hated people here that could be used in that sense. But we're not fighting in any wars. We don't have any issues like that. There has been some coverage of, ex-army guys or army guys on leave have gone over to Ukraine and died. And, like, I mean, they'll get like two or three stories with their parents getting like a speaking slot, but you need someone who like these guys aren't doing it for public appeal, right? Like that's not why they're going over there. And also they're not alive anymore, so they can't be used as a media totem. Yeah, I just don't know how it works. Like unless something gets hotter in the South China Sea and you've got like some guy on a boat who falls overboard, right?
I think that the framing of China as somehow being a country which cares enough about New Zealand to continuously do cyber attacks on it is kind of is kind of where they might be going with it, like a domestic cyber terrorism incident, which then reinforces the need for us to join AUKUS,
And they
and
just get
then
what? They get some fucking nerd like to be
yeah,
the main face of like,
yeah, like someone
okay,
who looks like my brother. You know what I mean?
wow. I hope he doesn't listen to this podcast, Jenny.
No, he would not.
Okay.
But no, I kind of feel like that's a viable route because they really have been focusing and hammering hard on the cyber terrorism somehow related to nuclear warfare link for the past couple months in the media specifically, right?
Yeah.
And it's like these are two words that cyber terrorism, I understand the yellow scare stuff is we've been doing that dialogue and the line of questioning for decades and aeons. But I think it's very rare that we have the China is a nuclear threat line coming from New Zealand, and that's the thing that we've really seen a big bump in the past couple of months.
Yeah.
As to how that's linked to what they supposedly have been doing in New Zealand, who knows? Critics certainly don't know, but I think that line being trotted out is probably emblematic of where they want that sort of association to go. And I really do think that they're gearing up for like a manufactured domestic cyber attack of some sort.
Yeah, because they always say like China-backed hackers,
Yeah,
right? Or whatever. And it's like, no,
exactly.
it's just no, these are hackers in China. What are you talking about? You
Yeah.
fucking idiots. Like,
There's a StarCraft players in an internet cafe in Xi'an.
and they got access to some Hotmail addresses. Well done. And like,
Yeah.
obviously, like,
Can we fish Anne Marie Brady?
probably really easily.
Yeah, I don't think it would be difficult.
Yeah.
We
But
shouldn't do that, obviously.
no one should
We
do
won't
that.
do
Guys,
that.
no one
We
should
No,
be
no,
doing
no, no.
that.
We will not do that.
It's just
You
funny to
shouldn't
think about.
either.
It's funny to think about.
Yeah.
As
They're
a
like you said,
thought
I mean, it's a
experiment.
doomed venture, right? Because it's our biggest. Oh, sorry, I don't know if it's our biggest, but one of our major trading partners,
Biggest.
right?
It is, yeah.
Really? Okay, so our biggest trading partner, and like you said, I mean, it's rearranging the plastic preschool chairs on the Titanic. Is really what it is.
Yeah.
We want to join the big boy table, but the table is a frigate and it's sinking off the coast.
Yeah.
Bye. Bye.
Mm.
So,
The really irritating thing to me is this these constant claims that like the reportage and the way we're talking about this as a society are not xenophobic. When you see I see it. I see like the uptick of like anti-Chinese rhetoric and racism against Asian people in general on the ground, right? Like I don't look Asian in any way. But they're just like, oh no, it can't possibly be. It's we're just reporting facts. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Do you understand how an information space works? Do you understand how this stuff informs the average incredibly racist New Zealander? You fucking idiots.
I mean, you're right, but like, what it would. Two things. I mean, the first is, yeah, we're seeing an uptick in these stories. In fact, it's not just specifically about the kind of military applications. It's also this, I saw on stuff and I posted in the server, uncritically, this, conspiracy theory on behalf of the American feds about COVID lab leak and deliberate bioweapons and so on and so forth. Just this kind of outlandish stuff, right? From people who aren't epidemiologists. They're literally FBI feds discussing like theories that the CIA has and all of that. Like, you are getting this straight from the source from people who are feds, and you're printing this as if these are somehow like medical experts. Just their reckons that they're kind of salting it with, and like perhaps there's a limited hangout component to it, but there's no evidence of any of this shit. Why are you printing it? Why is this in stuff? And it's only allowed because the window has opened, because there is enough of this kind of military gearing up in the manufacturing of public support for it, or at least of quashing any sort of dissent about it and distance about it.
I remember
for all they love to talk about, Chinese dissidents who are usually just poets who talk about, the lying flat movement or whatever it is, or, maybe they're sex pests or something like that, and they get like a nice sinecure in the United States to say bad things about China to escape justice there. But, if it's our dissidents, like, you can't get any airtime. It's astonishing how full spectrum the crackdown is on anything that is not what a few years ago, as John Key kind of noted, not to hand it to him, was an extremist view that undermined our economic position, even from a kind of conservative, a true conservative perspective, not like a kind of reactionary, but conservative sort of perspective.
I think
and
the other
sorry,
thing...
so that's number one. Oh, no, you can
no,
go,
keep
Kyle.
going. I want number two.
Well, Kyle,
That's all you got.
next year it's all going to be number two. I'm telling you. I think you ask what it's going to appear as, and I think in the United States, right, like they have this soldier worship, but in particular there's a kind of Christo-fascism, right? But we don't really have that here nearly as much. I mean, you talk about Brian Tamaki, but he is an apostle of capitalism, right? Like he's not really anything to do with religion. I don't know, is he even draping his stuff in religion much anymore? He just uses the kind of Pentecostal buzzwords in between, right? Like he tries to import some of that American Christo-fascism, but it doesn't really work here. And I think our equivalent of that, the civic religion that we have, is rugby. And it's really only the lucky happenstance that a lot of rugby players are like Maori and Pacifica and don't want to brook any of that bullshit that they won't be used that way. But some of them have been in the past. I mean, like, Richie McCaw being a kind of tool with a witting or unwitting of the National Party.
There's the
under
Mowbray
John
link.
Key.
There's the fucking Mowbray link.
And if they can, and if they are able to, I think that sports people and rugby people will be the way they do it. I mean, you can look at like Mahi Drysdale and Tauranga, right? This is the way that those individual figures will appear, I think. And it might take some time, but I suspect that they will need to create cults around soldiers. There's a lot of resistance to it. But, like Edmonds, it's sure to rise.
Let's switch it up. Because, this is just
What was the thing you were going to say?
Oh, I was going to say, even like a couple of years ago when we were a properly anti-COVID country, people would have been rightly calling stuff out like this for being xenophobic. But now you're not allowed to say it, right? Like, because the window has opened, as you say. Like, we were attacked for like being conspiracy theorists just for even saying for even reporting on the fact that the feds were trying to push this, for like even thinking that you could talk about lab leak theories, because sentiment against anti-COVID or what do you want to say, public health stuff was so strong. But that shifted as well. And now the term xenophobia can't even be used because you're a conspiracy theorist if you do. But moving on, we've got a horrible right-wing government here. They're fucking everything up. People are now saying it's the worst since 91, which we predicted on this podcast in 2022 and many times since that.
You're not allowed to be right too early.
Yeah, well, we were right in 2023 as well, and in 2024. That was very easy to do if you're looking at who is coming into power, how they're going to utilize ACT in New Zealand first. They're crashing the economy. They're getting rid of people's jobs. They're putting people into horrible situations. They are slashing public funding. They're looking at a full privatization via shock and awe. Very obvious they're going to do this. My prediction, and tell me what you think, is that this year has been setting the groundwork for that. In the process, making a whole bunch of their cheerleaders in the press looking like fucking idiots. I think the number one miss of the gallery this year was Thomas Coughlin 6 months ago saying, "Put on your dancing shoes, Mr. Luxon, the rockstar economy is back," or some shit. Only for the entire economy to just go into recession, highest unemployment in years, etc., etc.
He's been spending the last 6 months cleaning the fucking smegma between his teeth out of that.
Incredible.
Fuck me, Thomas Coughlin.
Absolutely wild. And no, all of these fucking journos, no, stenographers, there are never any consequences for getting it so wildly wrong. However, I think this year has been setting the groundwork, pushing out local funding, making it incredibly untenable for small and medium businesses to successfully defend their market niche. And next year, we're going to see an influx of offshore capital, predominantly from the US, probably in large part from Silicon Valley, snapping up startups, snapping up small and medium businesses, snapping up public services to fill that niche. And it is going to be an insane injection of capital into the New Zealand economy, which is going to immediately be sold. And you're going to watch it probably happen in concert. As people are going to be ready for this with their messaging. You're going to see every single media channel saying we've made a turnaround. Look at our economy go as the GDP just goes through the fucking roof. Not there'll be nothing to no coverage of productive capacity. there'll be no coverage of like how many people are still without jobs, or people that have been kicked off the benefit, and how much people are still struggling. It'll be just number goes up. Looks like Luxon and Willis saved the day. And I'm expecting that within the first 6 months of next year. I hope I'm wrong about that, but with the way that both political media and business entities have been operating just so blatantly around this stuff, so clearly aligned. We got the Vision Wellington stuff with Stuff NZ as well, where media decision makers are actively doing air quotes non-political advocacy to politically push local councils.
Yeah, we're back to Citizen Kane newspaper ownership, apparently.
It's so fucking cooked. So I expect that this is going to be the direction we're heading. What, like mid 2000s Ireland? Like just huge influx of stuff. We have no capital gains tax here. Still, we have no wealth tax. We have none of the protections that would stop this wave of venture and vulture capitalism from just eating us alive. And it's gonna look really, really good on the spreadsheets. Can the right-wing government keep it all together? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to look to the future, look on Parliament's public submissions website at the moment. This is kind of classic, like you were saying, shock and awe. They are trying to push through as many of the public submissions periods for their bills as possible over this period. There are 21 that are currently active, and some of them are quite big, right? There's the Principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill, something that would fundamentally alter the constitutional nature of this country. There's the Oranga Tamariki Serious Youth Offending Amendment Bill, which is the boot camps one, right? There's the Social Security Amendment Bill, further sanctions, harsher on people who are unemployed, Disputes Tribunal Amendment Bill. There's a Racing Industry Amendment Bill. There are two employment relations bills that are before at the moment, including one which would deduct people's pay for partial strikes, i.e. for industrial action, including work to rule, which is a form of industrial action where people do their job description, but no more than it, i.e. no free labor. And so David Seymour, the head of the quote unquote Libertarian Party, is trying to increase wage theft. For the work that people have done. They shouldn't be remunerated because, their masters and betters need to control their lives more. So there are all of these.
Yeah. You got the regulations bill coming in as well, and you got the fast track bill coming into play.
I mean, they're doing a broadcasting amendment bill so that they can advertise on fucking Christmas. So we have this nonstop onslaught of capitalist programming coming at us, no reprieve whatsoever, which I'm sure you'll love, Ginny. But
yeah, because it's the best time of the year for advertising. Come on.
Just unreal, right? Unreal stuff. I will not I don't know if they'll go this far, but imagine if they, repealed the tobacco advertising regulations or something like that. That's possible. And like you were saying, the shock and awe was an attempt now. They've got the economy into a tailspin, into a recession, which is what they want, right? From now on, first of all, there is that kind of disaster shock therapy through privatization. That will happen. But the purpose of that not only is, some of the sort of standard results and outcomes of privatization, which is kind of extracting public wealth into private hands and taking out, all of that risk of having built all the infrastructure before you just sort of give it away to the ruling class. But there is also the component that it diminishes that kind of public space and that public sphere as well. The kind of it sort of de-democratizes the country and makes further resistance even more difficult. And I think that that's something that we really need to reckon with, is because this is something which would cement change in the political economic structure of the country, something which is difficult to reverse. We still haven't reversed what was done in the 1980s. When there was a Three Waters entrenchment provision going through, there was a hue and a cry from all of these public law professors, some of whom I follow, who follow me, but I really want to call them out about this. There was a hue and a cry about how this would just be outrageous, that Labour and the Greens would try to make it so that water, which is essential to human life in this country, would need a supermajority to sort of overturn the structure of the Three Waters, right? Because it was too political, because this is your individual agenda, and what if National were to do that? And it's like, yeah, they went and they're going to do it anyway, and they already did it. And our previous fourth Labour government already did that in the 1980s. Yeah. Like, think about it. The neoliberal period and the turn that happened there was not only a constitutional revolution in the sort of Jeffrey Palmerist sense, but also in the sense that it totally restructured the country, disempowered swaths of people, like killed a lot of people, and it cemented this new formation, a new essentially like extra constitutional economic political structure to the entire society, an entrenchment which couldn't be undone even by votes. There was a huge constitutional change, and yet nobody was discussing that. And nobody's been discussing that National is doing the same thing here. They are furthering and deepening this and turning it from a kind of neoliberal period into a true corporatist fascist kind of economy, right? This kind of command economy from the hands of a few capitalists rather than anything amenable to public control, this totalizing force, and they're making it impossible to remove and unpick any of this. And yet, we're not seeing the same responses from those law professors. We see occasional discussions about an individual bill, like the gang patch law being an overstep and so on and so forth, or the fast track bill, and this is concerning. But that is the tip of the iceberg. What they're doing is so much more significant than what the Three Waters Bill would do. In fact, the Treaty Principles Bill in and of itself would fundamentally reshape this country in a way that hasn't been seen since the late 19th century, when it was declared a simple nullity by Justice Prendergast. I don't think people truly understand that one of the only things that is standing between paying for the fucking air that you're breathing and the water that you drink and having it be safe to drink is that iwi have actually fought back against this government, the settler colonial government in the 20th century. You should be grateful on your hands and knees for what Maori activists did in the 1970s and the 1980s, because they're all about to make it go away. And you're not going to know what you miss until it's gone.
Damn right. Yeah, it's really frustrating. And, Maori are going to be out there fighting this. I think, we saw more Pākehā involved with the hikoi than in some previous iterations. But people really need to step up. And particularly, people who are embedded in institutions who have that resource, capital, and capacity to do so. If you're a liberal or you trend progressive or left, you need to be out there fucking fighting. We can't just be sitting on the sidelines anymore. And yeah, because as Simone says, they're gonna take everything because this is how the stuff works. Everything gets extracted and goes up. And nobody listening to this and nobody recording this is at the top of that fucking tower. Yeah, but you shouldn't just do it out of self-interest either, just to be clear. This is humanity stuff. Yeah, really. But I guess that's what people need to be looking to do in the new year, right? Go and find organizations to join and fight. Because we're not going to be able to do this as individuals either. Start getting in contact with people. Start networking. There are already groups out there. We have people on from different organizations all the time who are saying, oh, yeah, come and help us out with this stuff. We need more volunteers. We need more help. We need more money. Go and do that. That doesn't often mean big corporate charities. I'm sorry. It feels good to give to some of those. But they are also part of the problem. It's like a philanthropy model. You need to be involved with organizations that are trying to change things.
This is a good pivot, I think, because the number one question that I get when I'm talking to people, especially people who are sort of sympathetic to being against what the present government is doing and what it's doing on behalf of capital, right, is I feel like we can't do anything. What can we do? What can I do? And that's the biggest question. And the unfortunate answer in New Zealand is, at the moment, not that much, because we don't have the institutions there on the left, because they tied themselves to the electoral project of the New Zealand Labour Party, shot themselves in the face in the 1980s and haven't been able to recover and are still holding on to some of the remnants because, they're buddy with capital, because it's many of the same people who flit between this kind of parliamentary Labour Party and between the upper echelons of the union movement. It's no different to many corporations at the moment. And a lot of unionists don't really want to hear that. And a lot of them, in fact, have discussed the idea of, entry as into the Labour Party or whatever. I don't really want to discuss the efficacy of what is essentially a classic Trotskyist tactic, right? Which is, not to denigrate it, although it's kind of funny to name yourself after a person who was like famously a historical loser. But whether or not you think that is correct or good or right, have a clear eye about what has become of organized labor in this country, and whether or not it is possible for you with the internal mechanisms of what you are involved with and engaged in to really leverage the outcomes that you want, or whether or not there is a kind of sunk cost fallacy to your belief, or whether or not it's just too much of a bitter pill to swallow to try to do the actual work outside of that, right? Or counter institutions. And I'm not saying that that's the wrong thing to do or what's the right thing to do, but I think that people really need to take stock and not immediately circle the bandwagons when we question what has become of the organized left in this country, and whether or not it's time to attempt new ways of doing things when evidently we've given them 40 years and they have let everybody down.
And even beyond let everybody down, right? Actively taken part.
Yes.
In some of this stuff, like helped
and personally
ease
benefited.
That. Yeah. Which, yeah, it just sucks. And yeah, it is really frustrating to be looking around and saying, who do I even help? Like, I don't know what to do, but maybe I can tie myself to something, and help push that forward, or help drag that into the light of day. But there's so little even of that sort. And we're talking like all the way up from like just left of center to out like all the way to radical left and communism. There are just very few big projects trying to do this stuff. And there are organizations out there who are doing fantastic work. We've had people come and talk specifically about people against prisons al terror, other groups of that sort trying to do on the ground organizing with specific goals. But yeah, there's a lot to be done. And I think there's a really good opportunity coming into next year, off the back of this year, with a far-right government. I think it's pretty fair to say at this point that is just punishing people to start getting some buy-in. Like, people are having the real-world effects. The material reality for people is really fucking bad right now. There's an opportunity here.
If you don't give people that off-ramp, if we don't have counter institutions, if we don't have counter programming, the people who are in the middle classes, quote unquote, the middle class, whatever the hell that means, people who are like own their own house or something, or like have a family and whatever, and two working white collar salaries, like those people, as their position gets worse and as like more income gets sucked up by having to pay for private insurance when the national healthcare service is gone, as their lives become more precarious, if you don't provide that counter programming, as I said, they will become the base for fascism. There is no question about it. We have historical precedent. I think that there was cogent philosophical argument to be made that was the case in the early 20th century within Europe. And we no longer have to have that theoretical philosophical argument because we watched it happen. It's documented. What are you doing and what are you waiting for?
That is happening right now in Europe.
It is currently
happening in the US. We're seeing it happen in real time. It is happening here right now. But we have this weird New Zealand exceptionalism where we're just not allowed to talk about that shit.
No.
Like,
no.
And
in fact, like you were saying, like who are going to be the people that emerge, who are like the hero, rich people or whatever it is. And the thing is, like, people here don't know that New Zealand has billionaires. They literally don't know that there is a class of persons that exist because at the moment their defense mechanism has been camouflage and hiding. And like, John Key saying, I'll have a beer with you down at the pub and wear shorts or whatever the hell. I don't know. Like, that's how they've managed to survive. But as they become clearer and as they emerge, I think, we've really there will be narratives, and you have to have a counter narrative, right? And you have to have something to actually give people succor in some sense.
Any final thoughts from you, Ginny, before we wrap up?
No, not really. I feel like you've really veered away from the startup investment thing, which is the only topic I had any cogent opinions
No,
on because,
Jenny, think of the advertising
yeah, no.
potential.
Give us your take. Give us your take.
well, I don't really have a take. I think, well, okay, no, maybe I do have one take. It's not really a take. And this sounds, I don't know if this seems common sense to me, but it's because, I've always worked at like evil corporations, basically. But I think it's you can get a handle really early on. And by really on, I mean like by early on, I mean even like a year in advance, of the major issues that are going to be highlighted by or promoted by a right-wing government that's deeply entrenched with corps, because consultancies release these reports every year about investment in different sectors in the country, foreign investment particularly, and venture capital investment. And this year we talked so much about how we're scared as a country that we're going to have privatized healthcare like in the States, right? Like that'll be a model that works for the 10%. And unsurprisingly, that it was predicted last year, that and has sort of come true, this prediction, that all the investment by foreign capital in the startup scene here, that most of it was either in deep tech or health tech. Uh, and so I think the stats from PwC, in terms of investment in the New Zealand startup scene, 40% of foreign investment went towards health tech startups. And given that we've seen a huge influx around concern with new software being brought into hospitals and things like that, new companies, complete do-overs of hospital systems that actually make practitioners' lives worse and more difficult coming in from these new health tech companies. This trend isn't going to let up, where they're predicting more and more foreign investment in health tech over the next year or so, and also even more in deep tech and software and services. And I've been seeing lots of contracts out on GETS, which is like the government tender stuff, for IT software providers, for organizing different types of stuff for government departments, for example, for project management for government projects. And they're all seeking like sort of private companies to help them and to bid on this government tender. So if you are someone that works in the corporate space, you read these reports every day, and to you it's really boring, it's just drivel, it's just whatever. But for some people that are not in this sort of space, it actually is like eerily predictive. And because obviously we know here on this podcast, if you're a listener as well, that there are no coincidences, right? When it comes to a government that's so heavily wedded to big corporates. Like when you get reports like this from consultants, it is a future plan. It's a future plan that's already been decided on, that's going to be enacted in this country. And so when you see these things and you see major shifts and changes in these trends, like tell the people that you organize with, because a lot of the people that are on the ground organizing space just are not in the same sort of environment as you and have concerns that are obviously and should be about the material and about the lives of people that are on the ground in front of them. But this stuff is important as well. Like if you don't think you can get out to a protest every week or help with your local community in some way, like you can do something if you're working in private. You don't have to just sit there and hand wring about it. Your knowledge is useful too. Like everyone has skills that they can bring to the left. And if you're like on the fence or you're someone who's listening and you've never heard a left-wing podcast before, some of you are out there. Some people tell me that they listen to this podcast and listen to like one episode and they're like, oh, you guys are cool views, but like maybe a little bit more extreme than me. Like we are not actually that extreme, I don't think. I think we are just echoing the concerns of the people back at you. And the reason why I think people think that we have extreme rhetoric when we say things like care for your fellow citizen or go out and volunteer, is because you're so used to being inundated by opinions that are way more narcissistic and place you at the center of everything. But as Simone and Kyle have already said, like the government, we've been backsliding for about this entire year, right? Like this coalition has backslid the country so much. Inflation is ridiculous. Cost of living is ridiculous. I don't think it's been this high since I moved to this country. And the only way that we can change that is if we take every advantage that we get. And it's not just people on the ground at the protest that can do the work, you can do it too. sitting in your comfortable air-conditioned building at EY. Like it's possible for you to help as well. You can do something about this.
Yeah, I think that access to information is really key. Like,
Mm.
and maybe some plucky investigative journalist will go and look at these fucking reports and go, "Oh, wait, I know what's coming a year in advance. That
Hmm.
gives me the edge over all the people I work with, and will make me look like a fucking genius."
Yeah, I mean, and that's right. Everybody can kind of contribute in some small way, and it's difficult to know, but I think it's also incumbent upon people who educate, not just actually in the teaching space, but educating and organizing, right? Theoretical education and all of that, and the people who have some position in these last wraith-like vestiges of the hollowed out institutional left in New Zealand, the kind of organized left. And I'm minded of the famous aphorism from Gramsci in the prison notebooks: the old world is dying and the new world is sort of struggles to be born. We're in a kind of in between space. And I think that the new is struggling to be born is the critical thing to take away and to note about this moment, because everybody is looking back. The reactionaries want to go back to, I mean, first of all, that kind of, as Hobsbawm calls it, the invented tradition that never existed, right? The fascists want to do that. The kind of return with a V people that we like to joke about, the kind of marble statue avatar people called like the cultural tutor or something. But it's also the national and its cohort that it represents, wanting to go back to a time where there was quote unquote freedom of contract, where people didn't have employee rights and all of that, and where the Browns knew their place, and where like New Zealand was this thriving pioneer frontier for whoever had $10,000 in his pocket. I think we are all aware of that. What we are less aware of is that even on people who are considered, uh, further along to the left, fundamentally have the same worldview. And for some people, this expresses itself in what you hear from oftentimes young Labour Green supporters, or people who are youthful, sprightly in the union movement, where they want to return to a Michael Joseph Savage kind of social democracy. That was an historical moment which existed once and can never exist again. I just want to disabuse people of the idea that it is possible to even return to that, because we are seeing a worldwide scale ecological collapse. You cannot have a golden kingdom which is built on sand. It doesn't make sense. The tide is rising. Literally, it doesn't make sense. You will not have a social democracy. Your politics cannot be, I just want there to be nice things for everybody. I just want benefits to be well paid and us, to have cheap rent. And I want there to be more than a supermarket duopoly. That's not politics. You are expressing a childish wish list of things which sort of existed for white people in 1955. That's not a politics to have. That's not an ideology. That's not an education. And I don't care that you have a humanities degree. You evidently need to think a little harder. All right? Or maybe give it back to Auckland University or whatever, because it's not serving you very well at all. Crack open a history book, just one, please. Those are one type of people as well that we oftentimes don't focus on as a kind of person who is looking back or existing within the past, the new struggling to be born in that Gramscian sense, but they are. But this is also true oftentimes of big C communists. There are many people who, well, I suppose they could describe themselves as, a Maoist or a Leninist or whatever, named after a person with an ism, right? And I don't want to isolate people who have a particular what mode of analysis or a way of thinking, because there is something useful in every kind of color of left, right? There are useful things, like I think anybody from across the kind of left spectrum can take really meaningful things from Lenin's critique of imperialism arising out of capitalism in the early 20th century and like out of the scramble of Africa and all of that, right? Like so I don't want to say that there's anything inherently wrong with this sort of thing, because I don't think there is, and everybody is useful, right? And everybody brings a new and fresh way of thinking. What I want to disabuse people of is the idea that one can uphold states which grew out of particular historical conditions in the 1930s, and this frozen in time, flash frozen language about, democratic centralism and vanguardism and so on and so forth. There have been debates for a long time about these sorts of techniques, but whatever you want to discuss about the techniques or the theoretical positions themselves, it's not post-World War One. That world no longer exists. The Soviet Union collapsed. China isn't socialist or communist or whatever you want to call it. Like, all of these things, they just don't exist. This world doesn't exist anymore. The playing field has changed. We don't exist in industrial or just post-industrial capitalism, right? And the system of the imperial core and the periphery is arranged in different ways and with different flows than it used to have. There are some fundamentals which remain the same. The majority of the labor which produces wealth in the world comes from the global south and isn't extracted out of there. And there are modes of thinking which are really useful. But trying to paint yourself in, like the American patriot, communists, whatever they want to call themselves, like those kind of cultists who have come out of social media, right, in the United States, who will say, like, have like a Lincoln bust in the style of Soviet realism or something like that, like an art movement which existed 100 years ago. I understand, because the new struggles to be born, but you need to envision a future. The debates of the 1930s can't happen anymore. It's just not applicable. None of this makes any sense. Stop arguing over whether somebody is too much of a Stalinist or something. Like, what does that even mean? He's been dead for so fucking long.
It's also meaningless to anyone you're trying to talk to. Yeah. Like, except other people who are subsumed by.
And the reason why we have these debates is because we're not winning. God, like, that's the reason why, right? Like, the reason why this collapses into this crabs in a bucket kind of discussions of endless wankery about theory is exactly for that reason. And if you are actually going to activate the vast a swath of people who are needed to get any of this work done, it can't be about that. Like, education has to be really, like, you do have to have historical education, and that is important, but there needs to be a look to the future as well. And so this isn't a prediction, but what I really want people to think about into the next year, and this I don't think is done individually, I think this is done collectively and through discussion, is what does that look like in the context of New Zealand? What does it look like globally? What does it look like not only among the first world, because when we say globally, oftentimes we just mean, Anglophone countries or us in Europe, or maybe, the wealthier sort of trilateral countries like Japan or whatever. But also with the global south itself, with the, what used to be called the third world, with the non-aligned countries, all of these, right? What does this look like? What does it look like when we link up and we discuss how to tackle this together? Because it's not going to look like what it was. And if it did, it failed then. Why would it succeed now? We haven't won. We have a world to win.
And that's where we're going to end it, folks. That's been the last episode for 2024 from 1 of 200. Thank you so much to my co-host, Simone.
They're saying that Cyndaquil is not a very good starter.
He's
the worst starter. That's what they're saying, but they're wrong, folks. I had a very good discussion with Professor Oak the other. We discovered that we want the same thing. We want the Mewtwo. We want the Mewtwo BBL, Brazilian butt lift.
The what?
Thank you also to my co-host Ginny.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm still stuck on the Mewtwo BBL, but thanks for having me on. Yeah,
no, that's legit.
They're making it legal next year. The deregulation of the sector.
That's been a year. That's been 2024. Thank you to everyone who's appeared on the podcast. Thank you to everyone who's contributed. whatever work that may be, through articles, through being one of our Patreon subscribers. That's been incredible for keeping us going, helping us to produce content and have these discussions. Thank you to everyone on the Discord, and everyone in the comments on our different platforms where we exist, whether that was Twitter or Instagram. Yeah, and just thank you for everyone who's reached out and had a chat.
And thank you, Mitch.
You're beating me to it. Thank you to Mitch, our editor and producer, who's been cutting half of everything that Simone actually says on one of these podcasts.
Release the uncut girl.
Absolutely
No.
not. Absolutely not. And thank you to everyone who's liked, shared, and subscribed. And I hope you keep doing that into the future as we increase our audience, reaching more people. Every day I hear from co-hosts and other people who work with us just banging into someone who's heard the podcast, and that's really absurd to me. That is still happening, that there are still these ways for people to hear us, not through word of mouth through someone I know, but just from existing in this space. So really fantastic. I've really enjoyed myself, I'm sure, and I hope our other contributors have as well.
Picture it didn't happen.
And looking forward to fighting 2025 with all of you. We'll catch you in the new year, everybody.
I started this year as one gender and ended it as another. And I've had a lot of well wishes, and thank you very much. And I appreciate that. And also thank you to the people who are fighting the good fight out there. And you're not alone. And it's hard to lose all the time, but you have to take the little victories where you can. And I think that there are people who are behind you.
Good. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you next time.
If artificers are denied, living a pointless life, but learning all your lessons. Fucking politics, there's no distinction. The road's apart now. It's paved with good intentions, and I'll admit that I'm at a loss for what to say when they quote us as a cost we ought to stay. I live amongst the people every day in this vindictive, forgetful fucking rain. It feels like we're on the road to hell.